These are the 4 rules that you need to know in order to play any middle game positions well. Chess middle game strategy is probably the trickiest chess subject, but today I'll give you 4 simple rules to play like a pro. I'm Grandmaster Igor Smirnov, and I'll use my name as the acronym for these 4 rules so that it is easier for you to remember. So in this game I was playing white against Leonid Kritz, who's playing black. He's also a Grandmaster, I believe from Boston. This was a 5-minute blitz game, and I'll rush through the opening moves rather quick because it doesn't matter for us that much today. Today we'll focus on the middle game stage. During the opening it's more or less simple. You develop your pieces one way or the other, and then you castle. Alright, and somewhere around this point, we got into a beginning of the middle game. And again, that is the moment where you guys start asking me a ton of questions about. Because here's the deal. Of course, ideally, you wish to attack and checkmate your opponent's king. But in most positions, there is no direct way to do that. And then we're kind of stuck, because there are plenty of moves that you could choose from. Virtually any move is possible for white. So how do you decide which move is correct? This brings us to the letter G of our acronym, and by the way, all these 4 rules are important in no particular order. You just pick the one that applies to the position. So I'll first outline these 4 rules, and then I'll tell you how to pick one, alright? So the first one, let's start with the letter G. It stands for go forward. It's a very simple rule, and it's actually my favorite, because it's simple and yet very effective. You need to focus your attention on the opponent's side of the board and ask yourself this question: how can I go forward to opponent's side of the board and hopefully make threats? Now think about this position. Focus your attention on black's side of the board, those last 4 ranks, and ask yourself that question: how can white go forward and create a threat? By the way, what is a threat? So for instance, something like knight f5, is that an attacking move? No, not really. So my definition of an attacking move is that it should force your opponent to defend, to make a defensive move. So here knight f5 puts some pressure potentially, but basically this pawn's already guarded, this pawn's already guarded, therefore there is no actual attack. Your opponent can do whatever, therefore that is not an attacking move. So an attacking move, actually I can see only one, that is the move knight to g5, because it creates this direct threat to this pawn on f7, and that is the move that I played. You can see how easy it is to find those moves, because usually you literally have only 1 or 2 options and you just choose between them. Now knight g5 hits the pawn, black needs to guard, you play rook to e7. Now, how do you play here? Well, guess what? It's the very same rule. Ask yourself the very same question. Go forward. How can I go forward into black side of the board and make a threat? Once again, you can think about that together with me so that you can also learn this process right now while watching this video. I can see 2 moves basically. First off, how about this trade on f7? Should I do that or not? Well, usually in the middle game, 2 minor pieces are more valuable than a rook and a pawn, just because minor pieces are very mobile. They jump around, create threats, while rooks are typically quite passive here. As you can see, they're not doing all that much. Therefore, this trade is not a good thing for white to do. So let's put that aside. Besides that, what are the moves forward that will create threats? Well, I can see 2 ones. There is knight to f5. This time it is a threat to the rook, therefore it is an attacking move. But black can, of course, trade it off. Nevertheless, that is a potential idea. Knight to f5 or knight to h5, which would put pressure to this knight on f6. And guess what? Either of these moves is good. Whether you jump to f5 or h5, both of them are about equally good. I chose knight h5, threatening to capture this knight. And that is again an attacking move, because that is indeed create something very unpleasant for black, because if I can capture right here, black would have to recapture with the pawn, which would double the pawns, weaken the king, and therefore certainly makes black's position worse. With that being said, black actually can't do anything against that anyways, because if black were to capture this pawn, which he didn't, that would be really bad for him, because that would allow white to obtain a title of a PM. Because here, black needs to guard this pawn, but after h6 there are many ways to win the game. For example, queen takes g6, making use of this pin. And once black captures the knight right here, then after bishop takes g5, we're attacking the rook and pinning it down to the queen, but black can't get rid of this pin because of this pin, and that is what we call a pandemic. Black, of course, calculated that and he played c6 instead, the move that also makes a lot of sense. He feels the pressure from this bishop. Perhaps black wants to play d5 to close the diagonal and to attack the center. Now, at this point, I successfully failed to follow my own rule. So basically, of course, I saw that I could take right here on f6, but after that, I thought that the knight is attacked, it will have to go back somewhere, and I didn't want that. And what I failed to realize is that there was a nice little combo. Knight takes h7, and this combo would win the game because of after queen h5 check to the king will at some point have to go back to g8. If it goes here, you can still throw checks with the queen or bishop forcing it back. And once the king goes back to g8, there's this queen takes g6, again using the PM thing, and here white wins the game because of a lot of attacking threats right here. White will win easily. During the game, I didn't see the combo, which brings us to the second rule, the letter I, which stands for improve your least active piece. If immediate attacking moves do not work, or in this case I just didn't see it, then you need to improve your least active piece. And it makes sense, right? So if you don't have enough attacking potential straight away, you just need to increase your attacking potential. So hopefully down the line, you will be able to play actual attacking moves. Now, so I played bishop e3 just to develop this bishop, which so far was doing nothing. Now, bishop e3 offers black an exchange. Should black accept it or not? Now, if you're a part of the Igor Nation for a long time, then I hope that the answer is obvious to you by now. To take is a mistake. You should avoid unmotivated exchanges. Exchanges that don't give you anything in particular, they usually help your opponent. Here, black certainly should not take on e3, and he didn't in the game. This exchange would be really terrible for black. As you can see, this would open up the file for the white rook, and that would increase a ton of pressure right here to these two squares, and black would probably lose the game straight away. That is how bad an unmotivated exchange can be. Black didn't play this in the game. Instead, he played bishop e6, trying to neutralize the pressure down this diagonal. Now, that makes sense. And here I took on e6. And you may be wondering, like, Igor, wait a second. Just a second ago, you said that you should avoid unmotivated exchanges. To take is a mistake. So what is that? Well, you see, that's a little different story. Here I'm trading his bishop for a knight, and a bishop is stronger than a knight. Therefore, I'm actually getting some material advantage. Yes, it's a very little one, but nevertheless. Therefore, this is a favorable exchange. I'm gaining something out of it, and that is why I'm playing this. Now, after the trade, I now have this powerful bishop without a counterpart from the black side. So here is, once again, basically the same classical situation, where it's a middle game stage. There are a ton of moves that you can theoretically play, but you got to choose one. So how do you decide? Well, hopefully by now it is easier for you, because for most players, they know that in an opening they need to develop pieces and castle and control the center. Okay, cool. So you did that. Now what? You sipped your coffee, you adjusted the AC, but ultimately you got to make a decision. So what do you do next? And this puzzles most of the chess players, but for you now it'll be much easier, because guess what? You can follow the very same rule. All right? G stands for go forward. Go forward and create threats. Is there any move to opponent's side of the board that would create a threat? Now, I can't take right here because this pawn is guarded, so that is not an option. White could trade right here, but that falls under to take as a mistake. So basically, you should avoid exchanges that do not give you anything in particular. And here, that is just an exchange of a knight for a knight and nothing special. Same goes for bishop takes b6. Just an exchange. White doesn't get anything out of it. So what do? How do I go forward to opponent's side of the board and create a threat? Again, I can see only one move that would fit this criteria, and that is the move bishop to g5, the move that I played. This creates an attack to this knight and also indirectly puts pressure to even the queen and the rook that stand behind, so that is indeed an attacking move. Now here it's bad for black to trade off these knights like this, because that would open up this diagonal. I'll show you just for a second. So here, moreover, white can probably even toss in this in between check, bishop takes c6. That would be pretty cool. Anyways, in the game, black did not play this. He played the correct move, queen to f8, just to solidify the knight. What do you do next? Well, same thing, right? Go forward, create threats. I played queen f3, adding one more attack to this knight. Now I've got 3 attacks. Black this time traded knights on h5, but now this rook is under the attack, plus it needs to guard this pawn on e6. The rook has to come back to e8 so that it keeps guarding the pawn on e6, and I attack it once again, this time with a queen. Therefore, bishop takes e6 becomes a threat, and black played queen to f7 to guard the pawn. Now I exhausted all the attacking moves. What do I do next? Well, let's recall the letter I. Improve your least active piece, which means that you need to look at all the pieces that you have. Here I've got this dancing queen, 2 beautiful bishops putting strong pressure on black's position, but how about my rooks? Well, they do what we all love doing. Nothing. And we gotta do something about that. How do you activate your rooks? You need to push pawns and open files, because rooks love open files. With that in mind, I played g3, and the idea is at some point to play f4 so that my rook can become active along the f file and hopefully even hit the queen. Black played h6, trying to get rid of this active bishop. I dropped it back. Black played king h7, also a nice move, solidifying this knight, also getting away from this potential pressure from the bishop. And now I love to play f4, but I can't because the pawn is pinned right now. Therefore, I played king g2, getting ready to play f4 on the next turn. Black played knight f8, also just to solidify everything, and now pawn to f4. By the way, once again, a little test. Should black take here or not? I mean, this pawn. What do you think? to take is a mistake. You can see that these are very universal rules. They apply throughout the game. And of course, not only for this position, but for any chess position. If black were to take right here, which he didn't, that would be a rookie error, because that indeed allows me to do what I want, to activate my rook. Then later I can stack rooks along the f-file, and you can see how great white's position becomes, just because black did one pawn exchange. All right, let's get back. Black played queen g6, which makes sense, trying to offer an exchange of queens. Usually, if you want to survive in the attack, you wish to trade off queens, because usually a checkmate in chess is delivered by the queen 99% of the time. Maybe slightly less, but nevertheless, in the vast majority of the cases. And if you are an attacking side, then you wish to avoid exchange of queens. In light of that, I played queen to h3. And now black goes d5, which also creates a very intense and interesting situation for us to think about. Now there is a ton of pressure right here, right here, right here, and white needs to do something. This brings us to the third rule, letter O, which stands for occupy the center. And here's the problem. I'm sure that you heard this concept before many times, but as someone wise said, if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, then you don't really understand it. And I know a lot of people talk about this occupy the center thing, but they are not exactly sure what it means. So here it is. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about these 4 central squares. Now, and occupying them means that you wish your pawns and pieces to be there, and you do not want your opponent's pawns and pieces to be there. As simple as that. Now, let's evaluate the current situation. What do we have here? For black, we got 2 pawns. For white, we got 1. Really, really sad. We wish to turn things around somehow. But actually, the other doubt that you may have is, why should you worry about this when there are so many things potentially to worry about? Like recently I saw an interesting survey which was conducted in Britain about problems of modern people. Let me pull it up. So here are the problems of modern day people, and let's say you're having a runny nose and someone is calling you from an unknown number. Well, you are actually trying to call a company and they put you on hold. And in the midst of all that, I'm telling you to occupy the center. Like, what the heck is going on here? Let me explain. So think about this. Let's say white would do this trade. Now what do we have? We've got 2 pawns of black versus nothing. Really bad for white. And I'm not even diving into, calculations, but just for simplicity, look at this position. Now black's got this open file for the rook, ready to go here, attack the king and bishop. The queen is ready to grab this pawn and again attack the bishop. This bishop is very active along this diagonal. You see how great black's position became once they actually started to control the center, because now they have a pawn and a piece in the middle of the board and white's got nothing. And that's how active black's position became instantly and how bad it became for white. That's why in the game I chose the other way. I took this pawn on e5, now I eliminated one of his pawns and I got one of mine pawns in the middle of the board, and once black captured right here, it's not good for white to recapture because black would take with a check, so I played pawn d4. And now you can see that white successfully turned the situation around. Now I've got 2 pawns of mine in the center versus black got only 1, plus my central pawns are very strong. This is a pawn chain. They all protect each other. While black has this isolated pawn on e4, which is actually pretty weak, it's probably going to be pretty easy for white to attack it in the future with his pieces, maybe even with a bishop, and to capture it. Moreover, if you look at this position right now, you see how hard it is for black to get any activity. Like, this rook is totally stuck behind the pawns, this bishop got stuck, can't move forward because of this strong pawn chain. Black could potentially bring the rook right here, but even then it's going to be stuck because of, again, the same pawn chain. The queen can't move forward, really, because of this pawn. The knight cannot go here because of his pawn. Even if black moves it here, from there it also can't go forward. All these squares are controlled by white's pawn chain. You see how strong that thing is? If you control the center, you control the game. That is why it's so important to occupy the center. Anyways, black realized that things are going down, this pawn is weak. He decided to sacrifice it to gain some activity straight away and to get some counterplay. Now this is checking the king and attacks the bishop. I play rook f3 so that I can guard both of them, and black goes rook e7, trying to play rook f7 and to take advantage of the pin. I played rook f1, it's still the same idea, improve your least active piece. So far this rook was doing nothing, therefore now we have all the pieces being active. Black played rook to f7, also trying to put some pressure right here, even though it's not dangerous because the rook is already guarded in advance. This brings us to the 4th rule. Letter R stands for restrict opponent's pieces on your side of the board. It's kind of like if there is a stranger at home, like you'd be more alert than usual. I mean, I don't know if my analogy makes any sense, hopefully. Anyways, so here's the point. Another caveat is I'm giving you a very human advice, and Stockfish will not always agree to this. Alright, because here Stockfish, for example, says that white had a winning combo, which I missed. It was bishop takes h6. And initially it's unclear what's the point of this sacrifice. You can't take this rook because your own rook is still pinned. But the winning move here is queen h4, getting this queen out of this position, and then instead of taking, you've got this in-between check, and only then you grab the queen, obtaining material advantage. Now, it's really fancy, really cool. Unfortunately, I didn't see this during the game. And what do you do then? Well, that is when this rule of restricting opponent's pieces on your side of the board come into play. There is this queen, which is on white side of the board, and it means that your first and primary purpose is to get rid of this queen. Now, why is that important? Well, right now, the queen does not create any real threats. Like, the bishop is guarded, black can't take it. This rook on f3 is already guarded, black can't take it. I mean, black can trade, but that's just an exchange. Black cannot win anything. So why would you worry about this queen? Well, because down the line, those pieces on your side of the board tend to create problems and tactical issues. You know, for example, if you just decide to, okay, I'm going to follow the go forward rule, right? There's this pawn on e6, I can take it, and you start calculating. If black takes, I take, I hit the rook right here, he takes, I take, and now I'm like 2 pawns up, pretty cool. Black is totally passive, you know, life's good. But then as you start entering this line, at this point, instead of taking right here, your opponent all of a sudden plays rook f8, and then you realize that, oops, now the rook is pinned and attacked, and I'm done. So things like that happen all the time. Following the rule, it's never too late to ruin a good game. So let's take this back. Now, that is why it's so important to be a little bit proactive and to get rid of those annoying pieces on your side of the board, and I played queen h4 offering the trade. Now, black has to either trade or go back. In this case, he can't even go back because of this rook, but in general, whether your opponent trades off or goes back, that's not a problem because your task is to just get rid of those pieces from your side of the board. Here, black traded queens, and now this rook is under the attack. Black traded it, and now I'm up a pawn in an endgame, therefore should be hopefully winning for white. But black goes knight g6, threatening this pawn and a fork. I played king g3, and after rook to f8, bishop c2. Some time ago, I failed to obtain that PM title, Pin Master. So I'm trying to recover, and now I'm putting this pin, which is very annoying for black. In fact, there is no way for black to get rid of it. Now h5 is coming for this knight. Therefore, black played h5 himself. But after bishop g5, now black is totally locked. The knight can't move. So was the king, otherwise the knight will drop. And because of this central pawn chain, the bishop also doesn't really have anything to do. And after that, it's pretty easy for white. So I'll just show you real quick. But it's quite easy. White is just advancing and black has nothing to do. Here, actually, somewhere at this point, I remember I was thinking about Korchnoi. That was a famous story during the Olympiad. He asked his opponent, do you speak English? The opponent replied yes, and then Korchnoi said, then why don't you resign? And initially I was thinking about the same thing, but then I realized that, hey, there's actually this thing that if I capture this bishop, it's going to be a stalemate. That's what black was hoping for. But of course, in reality, white is easily winning. This bishop takes g6, white wins. Now you know the 4 keys, but I also promised to tell you how to pick the right one depending on the position. Therefore, let me answer that question right now. So first off, initially, you're going to look for the G letter, for go forward, because attacking moves are the best. And if you can go forward and create a threat, that is usually the best thing to do in the middle game. Therefore, if there is a move to your opponent's side of the board that will create a threat, you can do that. And so far, while I was doing just that, going forward. Now, the next thing is, if you don't see any more attacking moves that would create threats, then you settle for like the second best option, which is improve your least active piece. You look at the pieces which are currently passive and you think how to improve their position. So with that in mind, I was playing bishop e3. Then after a couple more moves, so white is still here going forward, creating threats. So far it's all the same thing. Then once again, there was a situation where there are no forward moves anymore. So once again, you settle for the second best thing, improve your least active piece. In this case, these were these 2 rooks. So I started thinking how to improve them. And then after a couple moves, indeed, the rooks are now more active. Then, here's the next thing. When there is some issue in the middle of the board, in the center, you recollect that idea of occupy the center. You wish your opponent's pieces to stand in the center of the board. You do not want your opponent's pieces to be there. And also, this occupy the center thing is kind of like that evergreen rule. Kind of like in an opening, if you don't know what to do, castle. In the middle game, if you don't know what to do, you know, occupy the center. Play towards the center. Move your pieces towards the center. This is like the rule which is almost always applies and it's always the right thing to do. And of course, if there is some tension in the middle of the board, that will be the most helpful. And now going forward, after a couple more moves, we've got the situation where there is your opponent's piece on your side of the board. This is when the rule restrict your opponent's piece comes into play. In most cases, there is no opponent's pieces on your side of the board, but if there are some, then it becomes your primary task to get rid of them, and that is why I played here queen to h4, offering this trade. If you want to dive deeper into this, I've got a free 1-hour-long masterclass where I explain you basically the full blueprint of how to play chess. So if you're interested, you can click the link below the video in the description and check this out. Hopefully now the Igor Nation is stronger than ever. Keep crushing, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.